that I was trying theoretically to transform my thinking in a formal way about how to understand the psychology of who we were. So, so these two processes were taking place at exactly the same time. So fortunately, as I was able to become more comfortable in permitting myself to be transformed by that. So when I was able to say, okay, I'm willing to give up my comfortable definition as Dr. Luther Weems, middle-class Negro at a middle-class bourgeois school, and to raise serious questions about my own sanity and become Luther X. In becoming Luther X, that was symbolic of an identity transformation.
What year was this?
This was 1977. So this was 2 years after I'd completed my PhD.
Oh, okay.
So I was about 27 at the time.
So it was a relatively quick process, really.
It was a very quick process.
From being interested in this thing.
Exactly.
To becoming a member.
Exactly. Exactly. Because I was searching. I was already searching. And as I said, with this whole process that was taking place outside, with the whole social disruption that was taking place throughout America and throughout the African world, for that matter. You know, the world was changing. It was very much changing. And so I didn't come with a nice, neat haircut. I came with an afro. I came like with beginning to think a different kind of way, you know, with the whole process. And so from there into the more formalized reinitiation or socialization of the thinking that was in the nation began to give me a disciplined way to begin to reconstruct who I was and to reconstruct my identity. So everything from the dietary changes to the way that I understood who I was, the way that I understood who God was, the way that I began to understand the cosmos. Because I was coming from a world where the cosmos was constructed based upon a white God who was in the image of the European images of what the universe was really all about. And Elijah Muhammad was saying that the original world was the original concept, but the original God is a black God, you know, and that somehow we must understand and accept ourselves from that point of view. All of this later turned out to be symbolic language. It was symbolic language to begin to trigger a paradigm shift in terms of my identity. But it began to lead in the kind of search in terms of formal analysis to begin to how to apply these things in a way to make them applicable to begin to change our own communities. What I did understand that behind this redefinition of identity was the power to begin to correct the disruptive and self-destructive habits that plagued our communities, and to understand how we could begin to work together to move towards certain kinds of objectives, how we could move from dependency to independence, how we could begin to somehow stop reaching for someone else to educate our children, to doing as Elijah Muhammad was doing with 60 independent schools throughout all of America and the Caribbean, how we could begin to somehow begin to even conceptualize the possibility of being able to establish hospitals and establish banks and all these other kinds of things that were unheard of So here there are all of these experts coming out of Harvard and the Wharton School of Business who could do nothing but go work for corporate America, corporate European organizations. But here was this man with a third grade education who'd gone through this process of personal transformation, who had the audacity to talk about being able to import massive amount of food and fish from around the world, to follow a kind of Garveyite notion. And I never even heard of Garvey, except as a very abstract kind of concept at that point. But to see this, exactly, in whispers, and still as a very deviant group, because that too was a strange group of people. But the idea that you really had to begin to change how you saw yourself as a human being, and to understand yourself as being the center of your universe, and then to also put in the proper context the nature of the upheaval that had occurred to us, and to understand that those people who had destroyed us could not be relied upon to heal us.
So all of this activity
Yes.
is reframing
Yes.
and reconstructing,
Right.
re-realizing of knowledge that, as you say, was intact and existed prior to slavery,
Yes.
was worked on, pulled together through the Association of Black Psychologists, which was established in 1968.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Well, no, that became the kind of the formal mechanism where we began to do that.
Yes.
So there were a couple of us were in the nation. Cedric Clark, his name, Saeed Khatib, who was already in the nation in California. And it was our conversations that began to make me feel more comfortable to go. Conversations with him, Saeed. He was Cedric X at the time.
Cedric X.
Now, Cedric X was simultaneously a colleague of a fellow graduate student and friend of mine whose name was Phil McGee, who had attended graduate school with me at Michigan. When he left Michigan, he'd gone to Stanford to work in the Department of Psychology there. Cedric X was teaching in the Department of Psychology. So they became colleagues. At the same time, Wade Nobles was a graduate student in psychology who was being mentored by Cedric X and by Phil McGee. So through my contact with Phil McGee, I met Cedric and then subsequently met Wade, and then the three of us, the four of us, began to formulate this kind of notion that what we call African psychology. And we've brought it to this gathering of black psychologists because the Black Psychologists Organization had already moved towards a kind of like self-differentiation. That, it was the protest of the 60s that said that we cannot expect the American Psychological Association to take care of our needs. So the forming of black caucuses and a kind of breaking away and setting up separatist professional organizations was the trend of the day. The black physicians were doing it, the black lawyers were doing it, the black social workers were doing it. Everybody was doing it. And so the black psychologists were doing it too. And so we, in that organizational framework, kind of worked together to begin to put together our ideas to build this paradigm. And we began to build this kind of Afrocentric approach. Simultaneously, we found out some years later that over at Temple University in Pennsylvania, well, actually, he was at the University of Buffalo at that time, that was Molefi Asante, who was in the area of communications. And he was writing ideas about Afrocentric thought in terms of communications. He too was looking at the African model as a way to understand communications. And he was writing about Afrocentricity. We were writing about Afrocentricity as it affected human functioning and social development. So these were kind of parallel trends
Yes.
going on in different parts of the country in different areas altogether.